Chapter 4. Your Side of the Bridge. So far, I have dealt with the acting process primarily, in terms of what the other person is about, what they do, and what that means. But soon we will be talking about the acting process, from inside of you, what you do, and what you mean. For now though, I want you to stand back, and look at events and relatedness with a broader, and slightly different view. I want you to collect the parts into a bundle. I want you to look at them as a whole, and react to them as a whole. This is important, because your acting at any one moment is about your response to the whole event. When you are in the thick of the acting process, you need to just take the event in and react. With this in mind, I am going to backtrack, and look at these things again, focusing in on what you need to have the strongest, and clearest reaction to. The event. The other person does something to you, or says something to you. If you're paying attention, the lump sum of their behaviors has an effect on you. One of the first things that good acting training will do, is to teach you how to pay attention to the other actor, in an effective way. Every action that the other actor does, has meaning for you. Part of the actor's job is to take those meanings to the highest possible level. This is important, but just what do I mean by taking everything to the highest possible level? What I mean by this is that everything that they do, has a consequence to your life, or to you personally. Everything. And the more personally consequential, and the more personally important you can make the event, the deeper you will feel about it. So, everything has meaning to you. Everything affects you. Everything alters your life for good or bad. But, do you stop to analyze these events when they are taking place? Hardly. Mostly what you do is to try to take them in, and deal with them. You take them in as a complete unit. This is the way we deal with the events of our lives, as chunks that we receive and deal with. Very rarely do we stop to take the time and analyze the events of our lives. Oh, later we may go to a counselor if we have trouble with a particular thing. We may also talk about the events of our life with our friends. But, when things happen, we react to what just happened, deal with that, and move on. One of the curious things about being in the thick of things is that we can focus on only one thing at a time. The most obvious thing that strikes us is what our mind latches onto. But actors are funny people. We are taught to spend so much of our time in the process of taking things apart and analyzing them that we sometimes can't stop doing it. We get all caught up in this when we should be just reacting. To avoid this, the actor should focus their attention on the other person, and just take them as a whole, then keep their attention there all the time. But that leaves us with the inevitable question of what to react to first. The obvious answer is the biggest thing. The most obvious thing. The most important thing. But, what is this most important thing in the event that you focus on? The words. The clothing. The whatever. There's the rub. If you were paying attention in the previous 2 chapters, you should know the answer. But in case you don't, it is their behavior. Well, okay. But, how about after that? Focus on behavior. But, aren't they saying something? Keep it on the behavior. Yes, dialogue does mean something. But, that is the writer's concern, and only secondarily, the actor's. The primary focus of every actor should be the behavior of the other person, what they are doing. What are their actions toward you, or about you? Because, consequences follow behavior, not words. Behavior will always lead you to the truth of your response. And, the truth of the behavior will always lead to what you need to do. The order of how you focus your attention is always this. 1. What they do, their behavior. 2. What their attitude says. 3. What is the meaning of their words? Let me take the straitjacket off, and tell you that yes, there are times when what is said is more important. But these times are few, and the way they are said, a type of behavior, matters more than the literal meaning of the words themselves. But, even if there are exceptions, they only prove the general rule. Follow the behavior, and you will rarely go wrong. Let me see if I can give you an example. Say, you are married, and it is your anniversary. You want to plan a romantic evening, and want to surprise your lover. You come home, and they aren't there. Great. You set up the living room with candles and soft music, then make something nice for dinner, perhaps your lover's favorite dish. You rush to the bedroom and put on something that your lover likes to see you in. Then your lover comes home, and you say happy anniversary. I love you so much. Your lover kisses you and says, in a gloomy and dejected way, I love you too. Well, what do you react to in this situation? The words or the behavior? Let's change the response a bit. Your lover says exactly the same thing, I love you too. Except this time, instead of kissing you, walks past you, giving you a dirty look. What would you react to here? Let's try another example. Your lover hugs you in a clinging, desperate way and says the same words, I love you too, in a somber tone of voice. What would you react to here? I think you get the picture. So, it isn't the words, so much as it is the behavior. How they act, and what their attitude toward you is. That is what most people in real life respond to. Well, people in professions, such as professors and judges, tend to be more literal-minded. But, even they react to the behavior first, and the words second. Silent players. What do you do when there isn't another actor to react to? Say, you are the hotshot detective, and you are just coming out of a house where you are interviewing a witness. A car drives past, and someone in the car sticks a gun out the window and starts shooting at you. Well, they didn't say anything, and even if they did, you would be too busy getting shot at or ducking for cover to pay that much attention. Events, even when they're acts of nature, are a type of behavior. A hurricane doesn't speak lines, but it does affect you by its actions. In the play King Lear by Shakespeare, there is a scene where King Lear is thrown out of his home blind, wanders alone across a field in the middle of a storm, screaming and raging at the storm. King Lear certainly has reason to scream and rage, but what did the storm ever say, or the field, for that matter? What dialogue does the storm have? Well, none. But it does have an action. The point in all of this is that the other actor and natural events do have the same thing in common, and that is behavior. So, in both cases, your job as an actor is to react to the behavior. There is something I would like to address here. The ability to react is dependent on the actor's freedom of expressiveness and their courage to allow others to see the parts of themselves that they normally keep hidden. An actor's training should always address itself to this issue, and in fact this may be the most important issue facing new or even experienced actors. I will go into this in detail in the chapter on acting issues, but for the moment, I want to say this. As actors, we are called on to show to an audience things about ourselves that as people in the real world we would never show. We are also asked to show the truth about these things. We are asked to show the primal emotions in their pure state, which means that we must bare our souls to the public. I can't think of a more courageous act than to show the truth in this way. It would be easier to walk naked down Fifth Avenue or Sunset Boulevard. As little children, our every action is the truth, but as adults we need to hide the truth of our feelings in many ways to survive in modern society. But, as actors, we need to expose this same thing that in everyday life we hide. So every actor, if they are to be any good at all, must come to some sort of understanding about this issue. I don't know how to tell you to find your courage. That, I think, is something you must wrestle with yourself. But there are exercises and techniques that make it easier. Let's review. An actor's first job is to do what? React to the behavior. What a concept. Let's move on. You. Now we step inside you and enter the realm where only you exist. You have experienced the event and related to the behavior of the other person. They have given you the stimulus, and now the ball is in your court. It is time for you to respond in return. Let's start with the foundation of your response. Your basic personality. The first thing that governs your reaction in the story is the kind of person that you are. So this is really where your side of the bridge begins. Who you are is the foundation of your reactions to others. There are two parts to this. Who? For actors. They are, what is my basic personality? And, What alters my basic personality? Every person, from the time that they are born, spends a great deal of time forming and developing their basic personality. It is the first and most important of human endeavors. By about the age of 20, the basic personality is more or less set in stone. Beyond that age, most people will only change their basic personality under very stressful circumstances, and only very reluctantly. Actors, however, have another job. They must take their personality and use it to fashion the reality of another person. So actors have to know just how they can fashion themselves into someone else. To do this, they must understand the building blocks of a basic personality. They can then take these building blocks and rearrange them into what they need us to see. So what are we talking about when we say building blocks, as it applies to a basic personality? Let's go back to the emotional bridge diagram for a moment and look at this statement. Past events have shaped me into the person I am now. People base their personalities on various things. Beliefs they have, events that happened to them as they grew, any number of things. What is important for acting is that they rely on these things that they believe in order to support their attitude towards the world. These beliefs become for them their behavioral truths. Then they use these beliefs to navigate through life and to dictate their feelings and actions. These behavioral truths are the building blocks of their personality. Let me give you an example. Because a man was beaten by his father when he was young, he tends to distrust all older men who even slightly resemble his father, and treats them badly. Events in this man's life made him dislike his father, so he dislikes others if they resemble his father. This man has in his basic personality the dislike of his father. As an actor playing this person, a prime component to be reproduced would be this dislike. Then, when you relate to the other people you encounter, all your actions would be governed by this behavioral truth, as are the actions of the man you are playing. The idea I am focusing on here is that you can pick out these behavioral truths, and using all the various techniques and exercises at your disposal, put this behavioral truth into the basic character of the person that you play. By finding these basic foundations to the person that you portray, and isolating them, bringing them to the front, practicing them, you can use them to alter your attitude and approach to all the things that you do in the story. It might be something so simple as the belief that I love someone beyond death, or the belief that no one can get to me. Whatever the belief that the person uses to define themselves. When you find this belief and practice it, give it a reality through your exercises, it will give you the foundation of your portrayal. But a word of caution to the actor is necessary. Just picking out the beliefs of a person will not be very helpful in portraying that person, unless you pick out the beliefs that relate to the events of the story. There is another problem to consider. Inexperienced actors tend to pick out one or two traits of the character and play those traits to the maximum. This is called playing the type. They force everything into a mold to fit this type. This is also a trap that should be avoided at all costs. The trap lies in making value judgments about the character. A man who hates all older men who resemble his father and treats them badly is obviously a bastard. This is the value judgment. So, the inexperienced actor plays the man as a bastard. They then totally disregards any events in the story that might modify or change the basic way this man relates. The real problem with this typing is that it tends to make the actor unresponsive, which is just the opposite of what good acting is about. Lazy actors sometimes fall into this trap as well, because it is an easy way of acting. To further damage the performance, someone doing this will have no character development in their portrayal. They will end up as the same person that they were at the start of the story. So, avoid it at all costs. No matter who you play, their basic personality should be grounded in the events of their life, not in some vague, meaningless character type. Alterations. In all of the past examples I have given you, we have been able to understand one another, because we were speaking in terms of a universal human reaction to events in our lives. These are situations that everyone generally reacts to in the same way simply because we are all human. You burn your finger, and you pull back your hand, and say ouch. Basic personalities are formed around this basic human reaction to all the various events that life offers us. These universal reactions are our primal reactions, the ones that we had before we started restraining ourselves, before we learned better. But there are things in the world that distort these basic human reactions and filter them so that the people respond differently to situations than they would normally be expected to. In acting, these are called impediments or character additions, and they usually involve drugs, dependencies, and damage. The 3 Ds: alcohol, angel dust, heroin, cancer, smoking, injuries of all sorts, accents, speech impediments like lisps, are all things that fall into this category. When you play an Irishman in Riders to the Sea, you use the Irish dialect. You use it in every moment of the play. It colors everything that you do and say. In the last example of the man who hates his father, if that same man were drunk and Irish, he would talk and act toward men older than him in wildly different ways than if he were on heroin and from the American South. Impediments are a very useful tool for the actor. They get attention from the public, all out of proportion to the effort that it takes to do one well. In truth, doing a really good impediment does take a good deal of work, but if the work is put in, then the impediment will function with little effort during the performance. With that in mind, here are some simple ground rules for impediments. How to create them so they serve you well. The main rules for impediments are: 1. Practice. No one is ever any good at anything that they don't practice. And any actor's performance will be hurt by the lack of confidence that comes from not practicing. I put this first because it is the most important of all the rules. No matter how well researched an impediment is, if you don't practice it enough, it is going to be awful and interfere with your portrayal. 2. Research to find and use the 4 basic elements to that impediment. I say 4 elements only for simplicity's sake. It is easy to get bogged down with detail. Most impediments can be captured and reproduced with as few as 4 basic traits. However, how can you reproduce any type of impediment if you don't have information? I see actors every day who speak in a silly pompous way, thinking that they are speaking in a standard British dialect. They use a few catchwords, and suddenly, they are English. The truth is that they are fooling themselves. Research and learn what you are actually supposed to be doing. 3. Practice away from the role, then combine the 2. One of the easiest mistakes in constructing a role with an impediment is in trying to bring the impediment to the role too quickly. Until the impediment becomes second nature, it is only going to give you too much to think about at rehearsal. So practice it separately, then after you have gotten to a higher level of confidence with both your role and the impediment, you can combine them. 4. Be consistent. It isn't enough to practice a lot. It is necessary to practice enough so that you can do your impediment while completely lost in the emotion of the most difficult moment of the performance. To do this takes considerably more work than most people think. But it is equally important that you do it in the quiet moments. Every moment is necessary to the audience's belief that you are what you present yourself to be. I have seen actors who in every other way were brilliant lose an audience because they weren't consistent with their dialect, or their limp changed from one moment to the next. The best way to avoid this trap is to follow Rule 1 faithfully. 5. Find the emotional or physical line and follow it. Impediments sometimes have a consistent emotional or physical tone to them. Alcohol is one of these. You have the weepy drunk, or the angry drunk, etc. A mental disorder such as schizophrenia is another. When you have an emotional line like this, it is necessary to set the emotional tone at the very first moment, and then keep it constant unless there is some event that changes it. Drunks tend to go with an emotional tone until something happens, then they will completely switch tracks and go with a new emotion just as faithfully. Physical problems such as slurs or limps need the same sort of commitment and consistency. But physical impediments have a consistency that dominates more fully. 6. Establish the impediment strongly, then ease off a bit. Once the audience has heard the accent, or for that matter any impediment, and accepted it as a part of the person that you are portraying, then it is possible to ease back and go lighter. The impediment is not the focus of the story, and hitting it really hard will draw attention to the wrong area. However, don't ease off so much that you lose the impediment, or it pops in and out. Ease back just enough so that it is not smacking them in the face. Let's take a look at what we know at this point on the emotional bridge. We know the following. 1. We know that someone has done something to us, or that some event has happened. 2. We know that because of events in our past, we have a collection of beliefs and attitudes that is our basic personality. 3. We may or may not have some kind of impediment that will place an additional layer of coloration to our personality. Now we are ready for the next step in crossing the emotional bridge. What you feel. Now I actually get to have my feelings about what just happened. Having your feelings is more or less the midpoint along the emotional bridge. But having feelings is not a stopping point along the bridge. We don't spend several hours in a bottle of wine standing at the midpoint of a bridge to watch the sunset. At least not on the acting bridge we don't. Uncle Ed's spoiled brat has just kicked you painfully in the shins, without any provocation or warning, and you yell, "Ouch!" and grab the offended shin. You want to smack the brat. Well, that's having a feeling all right. But that isn't the whole of your response, not by a long shot. What do you do about this sweet young monster that has just made a painful introduction to your shins? That is where you now stand on the emotional bridge. And the question now facing you is, what do I do now? Well, that depends, doesn't it? I can tell you one thing that you don't do. You don't stand there and admire the scenery. The actor who gets his or her acting satisfaction from having their feelings usually gets stuck right here, watching the scenery. For the rest of us humans, this is only a signpost on our road to a full response. It's not even a rest stop. The rest of us have to continue on to the understanding of what we want to do now that we know what we feel. And now we come to one of the most misused and misunderstood parts of the acting realm. I want X. Who we are and how we feel creates the desires that we have towards our world and towards our lives. For an actor, what we want, our desires, fall into 4 categories. They are 1. Our desires about life. 2. Our desires about the situation. 3. Our desires about activities. 4. Our desires about this moment. You notice that I haven't used the word objective. That is for a reason. Acting is a thing of the gut, and acting instruction, as most people go about it, is far too intellectually oriented. Intellect is important to an actor, but too often, it gets sidetracked into the rarefied atmosphere of academic discussion, and lost for any practical purposes. All the analysis that an actor should do, should only serve to bring them to an understanding of how they feel, and what they want, so that they can then know what to do. So, I will refrain from using the term objective because I want you to muck around with very human feelings and desires. Not get an A on the test. But let me get off my soapbox and back to the matter at hand. The first of our desires is the most general. Let's start with that. Life desires. In acting, the desires of the person that we portray are given to us by the author. Ugh. How's that again? The author, you say? Not bloody likely. Most authors only give us a few words to say, and a couple of stage directions. Not even the hint of a desire. And the smaller the role, the less we get. Not so fast there. The author does give you one very valuable tool to find any desire that you want to have. That is the situation, and what you do in it. From that, you can get to anywhere in desire land that you want to go. But let's for the moment keep our eye on the big picture. Everybody wants to do something with their lives. Freud's wonderful rollicking id makes itself felt in everything that we do in our life. As well it should. The only person in life who has no desires is probably dead. Everyone else gets to ride the roller coaster. The person that you are to portray has desires about what they are going to do with their life. And those desires change from time to time like any good desire does. For acting purposes, this is the most broad of the desires. An example of this would be, to say, make a success of one's life, or to be the best guitarist since Segovia, or to put your life back together after an accident. And since it is so broad, it has less of an effect on the moment-to-moment work. It usually lurks in the background, and is maybe, or maybe not gotten, at the end of the story. But since it is so general, even the best of authors usually don't overly concern themselves with it. Why? Because it is the implementation that is important. How the hero goes about rescuing the fair maiden is the subject of the story, not his desire to be a hero. How the woman frees herself from the bullying husband, and finds true love, not her desire to have a better life. So most authors pay very little attention to the life desires. With one very great exception, that is, they must have a life desire at all costs. So as actors, we must have one of these things too, or at least, our characters do. Why is having one of these things so important? Well, because nothing happens without one, that's why. It is like a football field. You just can't have a game without one. So your job as an actor is to find, or provide, one of these things, so that the other things that you do have context. Frankly, that is all that you have to do. Just find the thing, put it in your pocket, and get on with it. The one thing that you should keep in mind, though, is that the life desire that you choose must match the situations of the role. Choosing an inappropriate life desire is like trying to play hockey on a football field, ice skates and all. You can do it, but it isn't very much fun. Desires of the situation. So we now have a life desire all spiffy new. Well, mostly new. So what do we do with it? Well, we use it, like anyone uses a dictionary, or an encyclopedia. We refer to it, to guide us in our general situation. And this is where we find ourselves, at the beginning of the story. Since we have a life desire, we can apply that to the situation that we are in, to give us our situational desire. An example. The stalwart detective at the start of our story gets a mysterious visitor to his office, as in every pulp detective story ever written. Because one of his life desires is to be a working detective, he has a detective business. Thus he takes this case and finds himself in a situation. His desire then is to solve the case. And bingo! You have a situational desire. Every story, every good one that is, starts out with a situation. And every hero, or heroine, finds themselves in this situation. So every hero, or heroine, has to compare their immediate situation to their life desires, and form a desire that applies to the situation. It could be anything. It may even be just to get out of the situation. But a desire will arise, and you need pay no more attention to it than that. Yep. That's right, like the life desire, you put it into your pocket, and move on. You have just got yourself another reference tool in your acting kit. Keep it handy. But you don't seem to be paying much attention to these desires once you find them, and every acting coach and teacher and all of my instructors in college told me to find the objective. Shouldn't I be doing more with these things? Well, yes and no. Strangely enough, I have come to realize that in terms of acting, having a desire is more important than what you do with it. The writer's job is to tell the story. It is his responsibility to provide the audience with the payoff. But what if that payoff is that you lose? You could be the villain, you know. You still have desires, and those desires still rule your actions. Since your job as an actor is to provide the behavior that supports the story. And all of the desires that you have are what supports your belief in your behavior. I think having them is one of the foundations of your acting. So yes, they're important. But if you pay too much attention to them, you fall into the same trap as the actors who think that acting is all about having your feelings. These actors make acting all one thing. They mistake a part for the whole. By doing so, they completely miss the point of what they are doing. Our job as actors is to get from point A in the story to point Z, and in doing so tell the story that the author devised. This is what the audience wants from us. Clearly supported behavior that makes emotional, if not logical, sense, and that doesn't stop. From the moment you first appear, until the last moment you are there, should be one smooth continuous activity. All your feelings, and all your desires, should only be the oil to smooth flow of the action, not things for you to indulge yourself on. Let me put it another way. You are with your lover, and both of you are in the mood. So you are in the bedroom, and are involved deeply in the event, and all of a sudden you get out of bed, and go to the window, and have a moment, all to yourself to feel how great this experience is. Well, how do you think your lover is going to react to that? That is why we have our desires, our feelings, but we don't dwell on them. Because our audience would feel the exact same way as your lover would. Think about it. But what now? Well, now we come to the individual segments of our story. The activities that arise in the course of trying to fulfill the desire of the situation. Desires of activity. Let's stay with our detective for a moment. He takes the case, which in this instance is to find a missing sister, so that she can get her portion of their late father's estate. How's that for a potboiler? He takes all the information she has, and says he will call when he has something. So our erstwhile detective has this information. The first desire he might have would be to go home and read the material. But since that is a pretty boring activity, our writer doesn't show us that. He instead shows us the scene where our hero goes to his friend at the newspaper to ask him what he knows. And finding out what his friend knows is a desire of the activity. From this point our detective engages in a long series of activities to find the missing heiress. Each activity along the way provides him with more information and gives him another situation that he compares with his overall desire. Each activity helps or hinders his desires a little bit, and these little changes in desires bit by bit are the desires of the activity. Well, that is simple enough. Now, if you see a progression forming, one that takes us from the general to the specific, you are getting the picture. I have wandered pretty far from the moment in all this discussion of desires, but I am about to get back there pretty quick. Because the specific reactions that we all have to individual moments wouldn't exist without all the other desires that we have stuffed in our back pockets. So let's get back to the next desire. Desires of the moment. Well, it has been quite a side trip. Out to the cosmos, and back, but here we are, our feet back on the emotional bridge again. The two most useful desires for an actor to have are the desires of the activity and the desires of the moment. You can't leave the other two out, but they don't help you with your behavior as much as these two do. But what about this desire of the moment thing? Let's go back to our uncle's spoiled brat, who kicked us in the shins earlier. You have just gone, ouch, and grabbed your offended shin. Your immediate impulse is to strangle the little monster. Well, that impulse is a desire of the moment. That's it, right there. Pay careful attention to it, because if you blink you will miss it. The desire of the moment is all impulse. Hey, that can't be all that it is. Yep. That's it, the whole shebang. That's all there is to the desire of the moment. Seems like there should be more, doesn't it? Let's take a moment to look at these desires. They are life desires, desires of the situation, desires of activity, desires of the moment. As you can see, there seems to be a hierarchy that I am suggesting. And in fact there is. The desires of the moment are included in the desires of the activity, which are included in the desires of the situation. And all of them are included in the life desires. There are exceptions to this general rule, many of them, but for the most part this holds true. Which leads me to my next subject. Modifiers. Our impulses are constantly being modified by our desires and our relationships. Seeing as how it is such a good example, let's rejoin our nephew and the sudden attack on our shins. Why oh why don't you just haul off and give your nephew the good smack that your impulses tell you to do? Well, because other desires conflict with your impulse. Yep, things that you want, whatever they may be, causes you to modify your behavior toward your oh so deserving nephew. But is this the only thing that modifies your behavior? No, the kind of person you are will modify your behavior, as well as how you feel about what just happened. But there is one other thing that will affect your behavior towards your nephew that we haven't talked about. and that is your relationships. Yep, remember them from chapter 2. Your relationships. What people mean to our lives, who they are to us, greatly affects our actions. In that chapter, I talked about the general types of relationships and the actions that they create. However, I left out a part of what a relationship is. What I am going to talk about now is the underlying structure of relationships. Just what does it mean when we say we have a relationship with someone? Where do the feelings that make up our relationships come from? Because we share a background together. The structure of relationships is fairly simple. It consists of the following 3 things. 1. The other person's history of behavior. 2. How that made you feel. 3. Your attitude because of this. All relationships start with some form of history. Your great Aunt Betty, besides being related to you, always made you your favorite cake when you visited. So all relationships are supported by some form of feeling about that history. Because of this, you remember her with fondness and dictate your attitude towards that person in the present time. And now years later you cry at her funeral because of these feelings. Because of the history you have had together. Do I get funny déjà vu feeling about this? Yep. This is nothing so much as a stripped-down version of the emotional bridge. So, relationships are your attitude towards each and every person you will come in contact with throughout the story. These attitudes come from past events that you have gone through with the people that you know. Since you have gone through different events with each person, every relationship will be different from every other one. This is important. All relationships are unique. Add to this the information on the 7 different types of relationships in the previous chapter, and the whole picture about relationships comes together. But remember that the 7 types of relationships are generalizations only. They are the easy part of the process. The structure that I just gave you is the real source of your connection to the people in your life, and as an actor, to the people in the story that you are telling. If your relationships are to have any reality at all, they must have this structure, this history, to as deep of a level as is possible, given your working circumstances. And now we get to one of the important parts of relationships, as they apply to the working actor. Relationship importance. I am going to hand you a paradox, and frankly, there is just no way to get around this. All relationships are important, vitally important, but some relationships are of secondary importance. Well, I did say it was a paradox, didn't I? The problem in relationships comes from the practical working environment that an actor faces. If you have the time, all relationships should be worked on, to as deep a level as you can. But often in this business the actor has to make time-considered choices. So I break relationships down into the following categories. Relationships that are primary to the story, and relationships that are secondary to the story. The fact of the matter is that every actor should make a hierarchy of importance to all the relationships in the story. Then they should work on all of the relationships, but pay the most attention to the ones that are primary to telling the story. But at no time should an actor not work on even the smallest of relationships. Your basic personality, your feelings, your desires, are all things that depend primarily on you. You create them for yourself. They don't show that much to the outside world. Your relationships, on the other hand, depend not only on you, but on how you relate to others. How you treat others is the primary thing the audience uses to know what kind of a person you are. They are all the audience really sees of your basic personality, feelings and desires. The audience wasn't present when those other events took place, and they can't see into your head to know what kind of person you are. So all they have is the present moment. If this moment is to have the depth and fullness that a real person has, then you as the actor have to supply that through your attitudes to the other people in the story. In Sleepless in Seattle, Tom Hanks plays a man who loses the love of his life, his wife. There's a scene where his son gets on the phone to a radio talk show psychologist. The psychologist gets the son to put Tom on the phone. In the space of 1 minute's worth of film time, we see the grief, love, for his wife, the love he has for his son, his sense of humor toward his son's daring, and his kindness to strangers, the psychologist. We also get to see his relationship to himself, also one of kindness. That is 4 relationships in less than a minute, and we see some of those relationships repeated more than once, in that same time too. Obviously Tom Hanks is a fluid and versatile actor. But where does this kind of fluidity come from? The answer to that lays in the way Tom Hanks, or any really good actor for that matter, defines their relationships. In this instance he had one relationship to his dead wife, a separate relationship to his son, still a third to the psychologist, and finally a fourth to himself. Each of these was defined separately and deeply enough that whenever he was relating to a different person, his attitude toward that person predominated automatically. So how do I go about getting this depth and fluidity? Think back to the 3 structural elements to a relationship: a history, a resulting feeling, and an attitude. You must have each of these elements, for each person, in the story. For the primary relationships you must create enough depth, so that your reactions are clear to the audience. And finally you must free yourself, and allow yourself to go through the feelings that come up from moment to moment, in the events of the story. But no matter the level of importance of the relationship, the actor is faced with 3 traps concerning relationships. The first of these is involved with what I just talked about. Trap 1. Not doing your homework. There is no way around this. The one big thing that will rob depth from your relationships is not doing your homework. Like practicing your impediment, you must practice your relationship. You must do presets and emotional preparations. See these chapters for more information, and you must put in the time. There are a number of things in acting that will kill your performance. Not doing your relationship homework is one. The second problem is Trap 2. Playing the relationship type. This one is the same mistake that our feeling actor makes when they think that all acting is about the expression of feelings. They decide that their relationship with their lover is that they are in love, and suddenly, everything they do, relating to this person, is a sappy violin love string section tear-jerking mess. This can, and has been side-splitting funny, in the hands of a really good comedic actor. But it can be awful in the hands of an actor, thinking that this is what relationships are all about. Relationships are all based on events that happened in the past. Spend time imagining these events, and the present time attitude that you need will be there, without you having to add it in. Which brings us to the third trap. Trap 3. Holding on to the relationship. The truth of the matter is that relationships are like a pond. Even the slightest breeze has an effect on the water. Everything that the people do to you should have an effect on the relationship. No matter how well crafted the relationship, no matter how many hours of preparation the actor does, no matter how many daydreams they use to set it up. If the actor won't let go of that relationship, and let it transform according to the dictates of the story and the moments, then they are holding on to the relationship, and stuck fast. This problem happens when the actor loses their courage, and will not allow themselves to be affected by the things that happen to them. Frankly, it takes courage to expose yourself like that, but that is what the audience needs from you. And that, above and beyond anything else, is what sells the story. Your courage to be affected. We are nearing the end of the bridge. So let's move on. I do X. Now we finally know what to do, and can do it. Now is the time for action. The brat kid is still before us, and even though we would like to revenge our damaged shin, we don't. Why? Well, if you have been following the interaction so far, you know that it could be any one of several reasons, depending on what is most important in the story. So you decide that it isn't in your best interest, or the kids, to get violent. What do? Well, maybe you take the tyke aside, and tell him a story about all the hurt that he gives out, hiding under his bed and turning into a monster that will eat him someday. You try to horrify him. Or, you lift him up by the front of his shirt, and look him in his kid's eyes suddenly gone wide, and let your eyes tell him that just maybe he is getting off lightly. You intimidate him. Or, you simply ignore the intrusion, and take up your conversation with the person you were talking with, before the trauma to your shins. You ignore him. Activities. All these separate things that you do are your actions. And they comprise one of the simplest and most effective tools in your acting toolbox. They are the big thing that the audience sees. They are the tip of the acting iceberg. They are also what you are responding to in the other person. Let's go back to the section on desires for a moment. You remember that I used the word activities. There were desires related to the activities, and within those activities was desires related to moments. All actions break down into activities, and all activities apply to the moment. These are the things that you actually do. There are 3 types of activities. They are 1. Simple activities. 2. Focused activities. 3. Concentrated activities. And a special 4th type of activity that modifies all the others in a way that takes them from the mundane to the special. 4. Superlative activities. Remember that you are always doing an activity, or you are responding to an event, another form of activity, or some mixture of the two. Let's start with the most basic of these activities. The simple activity. The first of these activities involves only the physical actions that you as the actor perform. You walk into a room. You put on a sweater. You let the cat out. You walk down the street. All these things are done for reasons, but none of the reasons are very critical to the story in and of themselves. These are the types of activities that you can be doing and be interrupted, without any consequences on the story. Extras in films do this type of activity almost exclusively. Watch them sometime in the background, walking hither and yon, or at a party talking as the star walks through them. It isn't important in the course of things to pay much attention to these types of activities, unless they demand of you some physical ability that you didn't have when you got the role. If this is the case, then you should put in enough research and practice that you can do what is required, without awkwardness. The focused activity. With this type of activity, the importance of the activity shifts from having no consequence to the story, to having some consequence. Your attention is focused on an activity that is a part of your story, but not very important to its development. You are going through a file drawer looking for a file that has information that will tell you the location of the missing heiress. You are talking to a pawn shop owner about a brooch that was pawned there. You are getting directions to the performer's tent at the circus, where you think she might be hiding. The concentrated activity. The primary activity has a major effect on the outcome of the story and whether you get your situational desire or not. This type of activity is where we begin to get to the heart of the matter. You are racing to get to your lover because his life is threatened. You are arguing with your husband about the welfare of your children. You are in court and giving your summation to the jury. As you can see, the type of activity depends on the importance it has in the story. But is an activity an action? Well, yes and no. An activity is an action, but it lacks a very important modifier. The superlative activity. Let's say that you have tracked down this heiress at the circus where she has been performing as an acrobat. She doesn't seem upset, but only annoyed that you found her. Well, you have information that you need to relate to her. Her father is dead, for one. Let's use that. Your concentrated activity is to tell her that her father is dead. That is an activity, by the way. To break the news. Well, how do you do it? Do you in a flat voice and a little bored say your dad is dead? Do you kindly say that you have some bad news to tell her that her father has passed away? Do you take a sarcastic tone of voice and say that she probably wouldn't be interested in hearing that her father died? Well, you could do any of these things, depending on the dictates of the story. What is important here is that what you do is modified by the way that you do it. An activity in and of itself is a sterile thing until you add into it the modifier of how you do it. And this addition or modification is what turns an activity into a full-fledged action. This modification is called a superlative, and every activity, big or small, has a superlative. There is a rule in this school of acting that says that you can have only one response to one event. Your response depends on all your internal structures and desires, but your superlative depends on the other person. It depends on your attitude towards them and their situation within the overall story. Or it depends on how you want to affect the other person. This means that you have an intention to do things in a particular way. You want them to be, do, or have a particular response to your activities, so you slant your presentation to create this response. So you deliver your news with a particular slant to the delivery. Let's say that you decide that you want to give this heiress the news of her father's death in a gentle way, which is what we usually do when delivering bad news to strangers who we like. So you sit her down, and in a kindly voice tell her that her father is dead. Delivering the news in the most gentle way makes your activity and action. The end of the bridge. You have just delivered the news, in a way that is consistent with your life and needs. You have taken her and her situation into account. You have done all that you can, at this moment. You have now become an event, to the other person. They have started their own journey over the bridge. Your part in the emotional bridge is over, or is it? Is there anything else that you should do, now that you have done this? The answer to that is a big fat whopping yes. Your responsibilities as an actor don't end just because you have said a line in a way that is appropriate to both you and the other person in this situation. There are two things that are vital for you to do at this moment, which are the same things that you were doing at the beginning of the emotional bridge. They are 1. Pay attention. 2. Be affected. Let's take a closer look at these. Paying attention. Have you ever watched an actor either on stage or in a film that seemed to check out while the other person is talking? They may even have a vacant look to their eye. Then when it comes to their time to speak, they come to semi-life and deliver their line in an inappropriate way considering the situation. I bet you've seen plenty of actors that are like this. Well, these actors suffer from a lack of attention and connection. They are acting cue to cue. They have probably learned diction and thought that all you have to do is remember your cue and say your lines while not tripping over the furniture. My point here is that their attention is not on you, the other person in the story. So they react in ways that are disconnected or inappropriate. They probably are inexperienced and don't know that the source of an actor's inner life is the object on which they place their attention. One of the most helpful things that an actor can do is to place their attention on the other person and keep it there. This, by the way, doesn't mean that you stare at the other person incessantly. It means that you always make yourself available to receive the effect that the other person creates by their actions. This is so important that it was the subject of the full first year of my acting training. Because without your attention on the other person, or the events around you, you will not be affected by them. And this brings us to the second of your responsibilities. Be affected. Have you ever been talking with someone and suddenly realized that they are not hearing what you have to say? They will sometimes rant and rave and manipulate the situation so that what you do or say will have no effect. Or you see in their eyes that they are closed off and maybe even dead inside. Or you see that what you have said to them never reaches them in any meaningful way. Have you ever been with a person who is acting distracted? You had to repeat yourself, and even when they were looking directly at you, you had the distinct impression that you could dance naked and it wouldn't affect them. Not allowing yourself to be affected will kill the moment-to-moment work. It is the actor's job to be affected by the actions of others and the events that they find themselves in. The actor's ability to be affected is the first step along the emotional bridge, and the last. Without it, nothing would happen, and the story would be as flat and stale as 10-day-old beer. I have touched on this earlier, and I will go into more detail about what can keep an actor from being affected in the section on acting issues. So I won't go into it here, but your job is to be affected. However you do that, that is what you need to be doing. Summing up, an actor is affected. They know who they are. They feel something because of this. They want something from someone. So they do something in a particular way to someone. Then they pay attention to see what that someone will do. Then they are affected by what that someone does. Thus the story is told in a long series of momentary exchanges that each actor gives and receives. This is moment-to-moment work. I do something, that makes you do something. That makes me do something. There could be nothing simpler, and like everything simple, it takes a lot of effort to do right. I am going to caution you here to keep one thing very clearly in mind. Most of your acting performance is created in your homework. When you get up to act, if you are thinking about the various parts and reasons that you do, or not do, anything, you will be horrible. I guarantee it. All of the things that I have talked about are to lead you to the moment when you can turn off your head and just respond to what happens. Keep this in mind. Actors do not act in their intellect, only in their gut. I will leave you with that thought for the moment. Thanks for watching.